All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking author Jimmy Peraz's incredibly fascinating take on the fifth chapter of the Book of Mark. Now, whether you've known this text your whole life or you're coming at it fresh from an analytical angle, Peraz just has this unique way of pulling out these deep psychological and spiritual truths that hit right at the core of the human condition. His recent analysis, which he titles From Bondage to Wholeness, looks at three wildly different encounters and finds this powerful, unifying thread woven through every single one of them.
Right off the bat, Perez challenges us to totally shift our perspective. He basically says, look, we need to stop treating this ancient text just as a window into history. Just reading it as some dusty historical account of stuff that happened thousands of years ago. Instead, he invites us to use it as a mirror to reflect on our own modern everyday struggles for freedom. He argues that the people in these stories are trapped by things they absolutely cannot overcome on their own. And when we look closely at them, we start to see the reflection of our own lives and our own longing for freedom.
So to understand Perez's central thesis, here's our roadmap for today. First, from bondage to wholeness. Then, we'll look at three encounters, Legion, the woman, and Jairus' daughter, before finally wrapping up with the call to restoration.
Okay, Section 1. From bondage to wholeness, the core message.
Perez makes it super clear right out of the gate that these stories, they are emphatically not about self-improvement. We're not talking about trying harder or finding some clever new life hack. According to Perez, the core message of Mark 5 is that Jesus offers complete spiritual restoration from things we just literally cannot beat on our own. It's a full journey from absolute bondage back to utter wholeness.
Moving right along to Section 2, Legion, breaking unseen chains.
Perez points out this wild detail about our first case study. This man was literally living among the tombs, totally isolated from society. And here's a quick fun fact for you. A Roman legion was made up of thousands of soldiers, which really highlights just how completely outnumbered and overwhelmed this guy felt by his own internal chaos. But Perez extends this into this brilliant metaphor for us today. He suggests that just as the man physically lived among literal tombs, we often, actually it's more like we enslave ourselves in invisible chains by emotionally living among the dead. We continually revisit our old wounds, past failures, deep regrets, you name it, instead of embracing new life. We might not wear visible chains, but Perez argues we're often ruled by anger, addiction, or shame that just completely overpowers our willpower.
And this brings us to Perez's definition of true spiritual transformation. Just look at the stark contrast he highlights between the man's initial torment and his restored state. Post-encounter, the man is sitting down instead of constantly striving. He's clothed instead of being exposed and vulnerable. He's in his right mind instead of being ruled by total chaos. Jesus doesn't just put a Band-Aid on the brokenness. He entirely restores the man's dignity and peace.
Now, Perez doesn't let us off the hook here. He makes this deeply personal. He asks us to look directly at our own hidden bondages. Think about it for a second. What unseen chains are currently driving your thoughts, messing with your emotions, or dictating your behavior, no matter how hard you try to break them?
So the actionable goal here, according to the author, is full surrender. It's about taking those chaotic, chained-up areas of life and yielding them over in exchange for peace. And remember, Perez notes a beautiful detail. After this healing, the man is sent right back to his people to share what happened. Because a restored life becomes a powerful testimony that sparks hope in others.
All right, Section 3, the woman, reaching for hope through persistent faith. 12. That represents 12 long, exhausting years. For over a decade, this woman endured continual bleeding. Perez really emphasizes the absolute tragedy of her situation. She had spent every single resource she had on physicians. And I mean, think about ancient medicine, right? It often prescribed treatments that made things significantly worse. She was desperately trying to find relief, nothing worked, she exhausted every avenue, and was just left with these lingering wounds that felt completely impossible to heal.
But despite all of that, she reaches out in quiet faith just to touch his garment. And I love what Perez notes about Jesus' reaction here. He absolutely refuses to let her healing remain anonymous. He stops and specifically calls her out of the crowd. Now, Perez points out he doesn't do this to embarrass her. No way. He does it to reward that quiet faith by calling her daughter. With that one single word, he gives her so much more than physical healing. He entirely restores her identity and gives her back her sense of belonging.
Drawing from that excruciating 12-year struggle, Perez challenges us to pick up that mirror again. Looking at your own life,
Where has prolonged disappointment caused you to just throw in the towel on the possibility of your own restoration? We all carry wounds that just seem to linger, and honestly, it is so easy to stop believing things can change when you've been let down time and time again.
So the huge takeaway Perez highlights here is the sheer power of persistent faith. Faith isn't just believing God exists, it's persistently reaching for hope. It's trusting enough to reach out even when life has entirely convinced you that nothing is ever going to change. No wound, no matter how ancient, is beyond restoration. Let's dive into Section 4, Jairus' daughter beyond finality. So as Jesus is actually on his way to heal this young girl, the most devastating news arrives. She's died. Everyone around them just assumes, well, that's it, it's entirely too late. But Perez highlights these remarkable words spoken by Jesus right in that exact moment of absolute despair. Do not fear, only believe.
And this right here perfectly captures that tension we all face in our darkest moments. Perez sets up this incredible contrast between human fear and divine faith. When dreams collapse, when relationships completely fail, or your purpose is lost, fear steps in and definitively declares, the story is over. Finality sets in. But faith? Faith trusts that redemption often begins right where we think the story ends. Faith trusts that the author is still writing it. Jesus then goes in, takes her by the hand, and brings her back to life, proving that what seems dead is never, ever beyond his power.
Which leads to another tough but vital question from Perez. Examine the dead areas in your own life. What situations, relationships, or dreams have you prematurely declared completely hopeless, just completely finished, that might actually just be waiting for a restorative touch?
The actionable goal he pairs with this final story is super profound and, honestly, really encouraging. We need to consciously replace our fear of finality with profound trust. We have to remain open to the miraculous recovery of things we were so sure were long gone.
And finally, Section 5, the call to restoration.
When you pull back and look at all three of these encounters together, Perez argues a really unified picture emerges. Whether you're dealing with unseen spiritual bondage like the man among the tombs, or weary faith from years of hidden pain like the bleeding woman, or even the absolute hopelessness of a dead end like Jairus' daughter, the unified message of Mark 5 is crystal clear. No form of brokenness is too great to be reversed. Jesus restores identity, he renews hope, and he brings life wherever death has tried to take hold.
Which brings us right back full circle to the core thesis we started with. Perez says this text is a direct invitation to stop letting our pain define us. We've got to stop identifying ourselves by our wounds, our past failures, or our chronic struggles, and instead, step out and seek complete wholeness. We're invited to be entirely redefined by restoring love.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, pretty provocative thought inspired directly by Perez's closing invitation. He states that Jesus doesn't simply make people better, he makes them whole. So, what broken pieces of your life, what unseen chains, long-standing wounds, or hopeless fears are just waiting to be transformed today? Will you let this text stop being just a window into history and finally let it become a mirror for your own restoration?